This week we have Fay the Unmeasurable. No, what are you, Fay
The most gracious.
the Most Gracious? There you go. Well, I knew it was something like that. And what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the impact the misogyny or the misogynistic ideas in Islam have on women today. And Faye is a celebrity now. I mean, actually we have to call her Madam now, Madam Faye.
Don't do that.
And it's can you give us some examples of the impact that misogyny has on the life of women today?
Okay, so I have a little story to tell you. Um, on the 1st of February, actually, this month, we had a campaign called No Hijab Day. It was a widespread hashtag all over Facebook and all over Twitter that a lot of ex-Muslim women, mostly, but some ex-Muslim men took to talk about the hijab and its detrimental impact on women, especially those women who do not have a choice in wearing it, be that in their own communities, in their own families, or by law in the case of Saudi Arabia and Iran, and some other countries, I'm sure. But on the 1st of February, I released a video where I had read out one of my old speeches that I had written for school when I was a young little Muslim da'i and I used to preach at school. And I decided to read that entire speech out. It's about 40 minutes long. It was excruciating, to not be sarcastic, throughout the whole thing. Um, and I went point by point and I essentially broke down all of my old arguments. And I think the thing that stuck out to me the most is how much fear is ingrained in Muslim women about men, um, and how much they are made to fear men of any kind. Um, so from that speech, I had basically said that I had basically compared men to zombies, that they were completely unable to control their desires, and that the responsibility of controlling that was on women, and it was the women's call to make sure that men weren't looking at them and men weren't using them, and that by extension implies that any woman who is harassed, who is abused, raped, what have you, it implies that it's her fault because she wasn't covering properly. And I don't know. I feel like that's a really, first of all, it's a really negative message to send young children to be constantly afraid of what is essentially half the population of the planet. And it also deeply segregates men and women so that they never understand each other and they're always made to view each other as objects and never as the same. Um, and I think that that's what's deeply rooted not just in the like the scripture of Islam but also in the culture of Islam and the way that it creates these divisions between genders. I mean, there's easy things that you could point out. The wife beating verse. You could point out the unmeasured inheritance where men more or less get more than women in almost every case. The fact that women have half the witness of a man, or that a woman cannot divorce her husband without going through a Sharia court, whereas a husband can just say that he wants to divorce her and he can. The fact that a husband can marry more than one wife without even fully informing the wives that he currently has. Um, or the fact that men can marry Jews and Christians when Muslim women are only resigned to marrying Muslim men. You can point those things out, and I think that those have scriptural context that you can just be like, yeah, obviously Islam is misogynistic. But I think that looking at it even from a progressive lens, where people are promoting a symbol like the hijab without fully realizing all of the implications behind it, um, I think is really, really dangerous. And I've confronted several people who are not Muslim, who've been in support of the hijab in this bout to support quote unquote culture. And I've pointed out several times that the hijab is not a cultural symbol; it's a religious symbol that has erased culture for so many women across so many countries. And I can't stand by that. It um, I've been made angry on so many instances of, these privileged women who never had to go through the challenge of wearing a hijab from a really young age and being told all these things, and them just donning it for the sake of World Hijab Day, and then saying, I'm supporting a cultural symbol, when it is not that in the
But have
slightest.
you been able to confront someone like personally?
I mean, I was on the news for it, so yeah.
No, I mean, did you ever talk to somebody about this, or is it just you talking about it?
I've talked to, I mean, online I've interacted with people, and in terms of my workplace, I've interacted with some people. But usually I think I'm kind of just brushed off as the crazy loon who had a terrible experience in her life. Um, but I don't know. I think that this strange bedfellow making of this Islamists and the left is just, it boggles me. I don't know how to handle it.
Have you ever been asked what the reason is why women in Islam are required to wear this?
Yeah, several times. But usually what happens is that a Muslim woman will butt in and she'll just be like, "Oh no, that's not why we wear it. We just wear it for God." And the reason that, well, the technical reason why Muslim women were asked to wear the hijab initially during the lifetime of the Prophet was that Umar said that your wives are not covering, so we can't tell when they go to relieve themselves whether or not they're concubines or whether or not they're women, like just free women. um and that's why hijab was originally instated. It was to make a differentiation between free women and women who you could essentially just go out and rape. Um but the reason why hijab is implemented in Islamic societies, barring that you're wearing it for Allah and you're wearing it for God, barring that reason, is so that you obstruct the male gaze. And to be frank, I don't think that the male gaze is anybody's responsibility but the male whose gaze it belongs to.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, what about, I mean, why is it, do you think, that women, Muslim women, say, well, I'm wearing it for God, but at the same time they're saying, well, I have the freedom to wear it or not. And then if they don't, they are chucked into jail, or there's acid thrown upon them, or they are punished for it. Uh, There's this cognitive dissonance there, where they are faced with a reality which they must be aware of, and at the same time they're still saying, well, I'm doing it for God. Have you ever had any kind of a reasonable explanation for this?
I think that there are two main reasons that I can think of on the spot. I think that the first one is that they're in denial because they know they can't take it off, because they know that their families will have an adverse reaction to that, for them taking it off. And unless we're talking about women in Iran and Saudi Arabia who absolutely have no choice by law to take it off and they will be put into jail, those women absolutely and completely have no choice in whether or not they can wear it. But women who are in the West who will say that they're wearing it out of choice, um, they might argue that I think that it's in the same way that a lot of Muslims will defend Islam even though they know it's not true. So when we talk about like the pedophilia, when we talk about wife beating, even though it's obvious that those things are allowed in Islam and they'll try to find these loopholes, I think it's the same thing that they need to justify it to themselves. So Muslim women who know they can't take it off will try to justify wearing it. I think the second reason that Muslim women here in the West will say that it's their choice is because the hijab has become an identity symbol. It's become a political symbol of their Muslimness. And I think that this was born out of all the stigmatization that happened after 9/11 and things like that. And the hijab and also the niqab or the burqa became an identity symbol. So I feel like they're no longer wearing it completely for a religious reason, but they're also wearing it to represent a political standpoint and an identity standpoint, that this is something that makes them unique and special, which is ironic because the hijab is the thing that takes that away from women.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
And
So I think,
what about the other reactions that you get from, funny enough, predominantly males? If a female doesn't behave, what causes men to throw acid in a woman's face?
this idea that they've turned their back, I guess, it's an honor thing, right? It's an honor crime. Um, it's honor violence. It's a way of showing that you've turned your back on our ways. So, for that reason, you deserve no longer to have a face, or you have to suffer for that. It's the same way that, Muslims will, or some Muslims will, abuse their children if they leave Islam, or if they're gay, or if, the girl wants a little bit more independence, or anything like that. Um, I think that it's driven by this need to keep the family name squeaky clean in the eyes of the Muslim community, or in the cultural community, or whatever you want to call it. Um, I don't know. I don't know how you can rationalize, um, destroying someone's life like that, or even taking their life like that, for something as simple as not wanting to wear an item of clothing. Um,
But there's no
I don't know.
justification in the Quran.
No, there isn't. But
In fairness, that does happen in Hindu communities as well, and particularly India. Those sort of things do go on within the Hindu community. So you're right; it doesn't happen in Islam, but it is very much an Asian culture thing.
yeah,
So, in other words, if you show your face and you're doing it wrong, then we'll give you a face that you can't show anymore.
yeah,
I think so. If you don't mind me just butting in there a little bit, I think there's something about the makeup of a man and the makeup of a woman. Women tend to be able to endure, are a lot stronger internally than men are in certain areas when you consider difficulties. I mean, men can break a lot easier than women, even though women are, if you like, more emotionally built. And I think sometimes with men, pouring acid in the face is the only way to break them. They couldn't break them any other way unless you kill them. So pouring acid is like the one thing they can do that the woman can't come back from, and that's their almost like that's their ceiling, or the step, the furthest step they can take without taking the life.
Yeah, but
They've
this
taken
actually
the
shows
life.
the impotence, doesn't it?
Yes, that's the point. So, because they have taken the life, when you pour acid or hot water or oil, because those are the other tools that are used as well. When you use those tools, you have taken that person's life, because you've taken everything they're going to be. They're not going to be loved again. They're not going to love again. You've taken all that emotional, if you like, ability or future they could ever have with somebody else. You've deprived them of that. So, in effect, you have taken their life. You've taken their identity. So I think that's one of the reasons why men do that to women. And we have to bear in mind, just on this, just before I cut off, don't forget honor killings as well.
yeah.
Well, there's other things in general, because I wanted to ask Faye about these things as well. Are you aware of exactly these other kinds of punishments? Because the funny thing is, in the Quran,
I think there
women
are different.
are
I
treated
think there are
differently than
different.
men, yet the
Yeah,
lashings are the same.
yeah. The lashings. So my biggest problem with the had, or the punishments for different things in terms of Sharia. So one of the punishments for adultery, for example, is the stoning to death, and for fornication, it's lashing. It's a lot easier to prove that a woman has committed adultery or fornication than it is for a man to be proven that. Um, it seems as though women are only given quote unquote leniency in any power, in any position of power. But once you remove all of that, the moment apparently, once you judge her, she's judged equally. And I think that I don't know, I just don't, I feel a significant level of guilt for believing what I used to believe, because of how oppressive the system is. Um,
That was going to be my last question. How do you feel about this now?
I genuinely, like, I understand, and I've tried to explain this because it's really strange. Like me, I don't know, 7 years ago and me now, I think we would have beaten each other to death because we're such different people. And I think that myself then, having been indoctrinated and sheltered and essentially just living in a bubble of fear, because I was made to fear the outside world and I was made to think that everything in the outside world was evil and awful and inhumane and they weren't like us. Um,
Wow. Have you been exchanging notes with Mimsy?
no,
Because she said this. She said, if you look at me a few years ago, because she was actually propagating Islam, and she's looking back at herself in horror. And this is exactly the sentiment.
yeah, it's just it's bizarre because you're sheltered away from it all for so long. And then like the my first like sort of contact, even though this sounds ridiculous, I feel like I'm talking about aliens. Like my first contact with like non-believers really was when they took me out of my home for, because my father was physically abusive. And my first thought was no one helped me. No, well, the whole Muslim community knew the kind of trouble I was in. My whole family knew the kind of trouble I was in. My father was no help at all, but it wasn't them that saved me.
That
It was these degenerates that I thought they were degenerates that saved me.
If I look at all the various abuse, well, not methods, but justifications that you get, would you say that in your experience, what you have observed, what you've experienced, is there a lot of domestic violence due to the Quran sentences which allow the man to be the head of the household? He is allowed to beat his wife if if the other two don't work and things like that. Is that being seen as like a like Muhammad said in one of the hadiths that like, no man will be asked whether he beat his wife. Is is that
I
something that you
mean,
see being acted out in Islamic households?
I mean, I can speak from personal experience and I can speak from a wider community sense. I think that, just to go off tangent for a little bit, I think that for the longest time, people are so afraid of commenting on what happens in the Muslim community, because they're afraid of being labeled as Islamophobic. And if that is the case, then it is up to us to actually highlight it. Um, and I can say for certain that almost every mosque that I went to, the Islamic school that I went to, when we talked about being beaten at home, it was treated as something normal. It was treated as something commonplace, and it was as if like that's the role of a parent, is to discipline you in that way. Um, the abuses that Muslim women face and Muslim children face at the hands of patriarchal role models in Muslim households is appalling, and I am astounded that no one is talking about it. Um, I think that for all their big talk, all of the different sheikhs and imams and scholars and whatever you want to call them, all these learned men who will come out and will say that the beating verse in the Quran has it's only a symbolic beating and you're only meant to do it with a toothbrush and all of that filth that they talk about. It's garbage, it's nonsense, because it leaves so much room for error and so much room for abuse. And I am still I watched that video by Noman Ali Khan and I saw Hassan Radwan's breakdown of it. And I am just so appalled by his mental gymnastics and how he treated the subject. Like it was clear that he's disgusted by the verse, but he can't disregard it because it's part of the book that he considers to be the word of God and he can't change it because that would be, you know, illegal in the eyes of Islam and it would probably take him outside of Islam. But the fact that people are still holding to that and saying that, yes, that is part of the Quran and we're going to stick to that is disgusting.
Yeah,
that
but
that
Norman didn't really do anything. He didn't address it.
No, he didn't.
What would you say? Would it take for a Muslim man to accept equality within a woman? Because I always bring this example of the captain of a plane flying me to Dubai, and his wife flies me back. should they be treated in any different way if they are, trained with in identical ways, they have the same level of competence and anything? Should there be any any difference between the man and the woman if they're doing the same thing in the same? Should they both have the same possibilities and to show their abilities at the same time?
If you're asking me, they should. But I think that I don't like generalizing because I have several, Muslim coworkers, I have Muslim friends, both male and female, and I don't feel like I'm treated in a disrespectful manner by any of them. And they also know me, they know what I do, they know my activism, they understand my views and all my stories. Um, but I think that to an extent, a lot of Muslim men are raised into an environment where they see their mothers and their sisters treated differently to them and other men. Um, I think that a prime example of that is that almost in every household, every Muslim household, the boys will never be taught to cook or to clean. And they will always be told that that's women's work. That's what women do. Um, and I think that puts like a stereotype in your brain that men and women are inherently different and they're not fit for the same things. Certainly in my household, you know, my brother's only 2.5 years younger than me, but he cannot do anything around the household. My father can't do anything around the household, even though after my mother passed away, I was the one who did everything around the household, even though I am not the parent of these children. Um, and I think that creates the dividing line, and then further making the segregation rules, like boys and girls can't play together, boys and girls can't be friends, boys and girls shouldn't be talking to each other, girls have to cover in front of boys. And if you're talking to them, or if you're uncovered in front of them, then that's inherently sinful for you to do. And they put that fear in you that if you do that, then you're going to be punished for that. And that is a sin. And Allah is going to hate you for that. And then on top of that, if you do that, men might attack you, men might harass you, men might rape you. I think that in a man's mind, in his formative years, when he sees that and he's surrounded by that, I think that creates a very misogynistic image of how he should be treating women. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it doesn't make sense, but it sounds like it was drummed into you.
So a story that I can tell, and I by no means want any sympathy with this story, even though it is a sad story, is that one time me and my brother got in a fight, and it was a very physical fight. And afterwards, I asked him, "Why did you beat me like that? Like, why were we fighting so heavily about that?" And he said, "I always feel like you don't respect me." And I was like, "I'm your older sister. What do you mean I don't respect you? I told you to give your sister some cereal and you just started throwing punches. Like, what do you mean I don't respect you?" And that never made sense to me until well after, like years later. And I was like, so what he meant was that I shouldn't have told him what to do because he's a man. And by me telling him what to do, that was me disrespecting him.
Were you also taught that the man is the caretaker and you have to get married as quickly as possible so that you get an identity?
Yep.
Oh,
I was proposed to since the age of 15. And the first man who I don't even know what to call it really. The first man who proposed to me, he was about 11 years my senior, so he was about 26. Um I was always brought up to think that like marriage is the ultimate purpose for a woman, which is I feel like for the West is like a very 1950s kind of look at what, even earlier than that, really, is the goal for a woman is to just get married and have kids. But yeah, there was no focus on like me having an education or me going for any kind of career. It was just, you're old enough, you can bear children, so now you should be married off because that is your only value. And funnily enough, the only and when we talk about, when Muslim scholars talk about women's rights in Islam, one of the things that they will always bring up is how the mother is highly respected in Islam. But that is the only position that a woman is given any kind of respect for. As a wife, she has to obey her husband. As a daughter, she has to obey her father. As a sister, she has to, obey her community and her society and her elders. The only form of respect that a woman can receive in Islam is as a mother. That is it.
Now, if you go and you look back on what your personal experience is, was any of this justified by using the text, or is it cultural?
Oh, it was constantly justified by using the text. Constantly. The fact that Muhammad encourages people to get married young, that one was used frequently, even though I refused to be married several times. And then also, I remember because I was crying to one of my uncles because my aunts were really pushing me to get married, and I told them they're forcing me to get married, and it's not allowed, it's not halal. And I remember my aunt confronting me and saying, "We didn't chain you and we didn't take you to get married. All we're saying is that you should get married." And I was saying, "You're saying all these things. You're saying that if I don't get married to this man, then I'll never find love and I'll never have children and I'll never get married again and I'll be old and no one will be around to take care of me. How is that not forcing?" And they're like, "That's not the force that's stated in the scripture, implying that
That's
that's
like
allowed."
emotional pressure. This is like brainwashing.
Yeah.
If you were told Muhammad said this, Muhammad said that, is it usually from what Muhammad said, or is it also the Quran? What is of a higher value in the daily life of a female Muslim? Is it more about Muhammad or more about the Quran?
So for me, I was quite devout before, and my focus was on like honing my iman, because I couldn't really do anything else. Like I couldn't study jihad. I wasn't a man. I couldn't go gallivanting out into ISIS and blow some shit up. Like I can't do that. So my whole focus with Islam was just trying to fix my faith and learn as much as I could about my faith. And what I realized was that the Quran and the Hadith and the teachings of Muhammad, they go together. You can't really have one without the other. A prime example of that is that the Quran might ask you to pray, but the Hadith teach you how to do that. So you can't really have one without the other. Yes, the Quran has a higher standing. I'm not denying that. The Quran, in terms of Islamic scriptures, has the authority. It has the top place. But without the support of the Hadith, you can't really practice Islam the way that, Muhammad, I'm just saying in terms of the Islam that I practiced, you can't really practice it the way that Muhammad practiced it. So when it came to these verses about marriage and these rulings about divorce and things like that, and the things that you believe, you have to take them hand in hand. So sometimes they would use verses, and for example, when we were talking about if we're still on the topic of marriage, the fact that men are the protectors of women, and that then gives way to Muhammad saying things like, "Oh, women must obey their husbands. Even if she was to take her own eye out for her husband, she should. If there was anything that humans could worship on this planet, it would be a woman worshiping her husband. That the majority of women in hell will be there because they're ungrateful to their husbands." It kind of goes. It's one piece that fits another. The Quran says men are the protectors and the I've forgotten the exact word, but the overlords or
The
such of
maintainers.
women. Yeah, maintainers. If we want to put it nicely, the maintainers of women. And then the Hadith would come in and say women have to obey their husbands as long as they're not going against Allah and His Messenger. They have to obey their husbands.
And I was going to go exactly there. What was your reaction in the beginning when you heard this for the first time, that you have to be obedient? That's not you, is it?
I so wanted it to be me. I feel like this.
What is this so sad?
For me, I've always been a rebellious spirit. even when I was younger, I was a rebellious spirit. I think did I tell the story of why I started wearing the niqab? It was because Jack Straw said he wanted to ban it, and I started wearing it. I've always had a rebellious spirit. And for me, learning that I had to obey my husband was just like a statement that made me not want to get married, even though I felt like I had to. So yeah, I was ambivalent about it, but also I had submitted my will to this teaching. So I was gonna do it begrudgingly, and I just thought, oh, this is my test in my life, is to be less rebellious. Or something. I don't know. But yeah, I certainly didn't like it, but I wasn't about to question it.
I just put on the screen this because what Veej just said was amazing, because this is true. You are supposed to lick the ooze that is coming from the man's hand because you are such an obedient good wife. Come on, when you read that, doesn't that make you sick?
Yeah.
So,
And
okay,
actually,
what part did you think
if
was
we
good? What part of the hadith, what part of the Quran, whatever, what was positive for you in your role as a woman?
can I just quickly touch upon something else before I come to this,
Sure.
because this is going to be long. So the other thing that I wanted to say in relation to the men being the maintainers of women is that also the wife beating verse. The reason that a man, even though it's the most extreme case and it's the last straw and all of that, all of your apologetic arguments, um, even if that is the case, the reason why a man can beat his wife after telling her off and after forsaking her bed is because she is being disobedient. And I think that that sticks out the most, and that is a Quran verse. That is not even a hadith. Um, but in terms of what's good about being a Muslim woman, there's nothing good about being a Muslim woman. I've constantly and frequently wanted to be a boy because I thought that independence and having a fighting spirit and being strong, these were all manly characters. And I was always made to feel as though, because my father would always say, "Why are you walking like that?" And I would say, "What do you mean? Why am I walking like this? How do you walk?" And he said, "You're walking like a man. Stop walking like a man." And I was like, what do you mean? I don't know what that means. And apparently having any position that isn't like meek and submissive is seen as like a manly characteristic. And I was always made to feel like I had that, like I had manly characteristics for, speaking my mind and having my own opinions and, just wanting to be a little different. I've always been a little different. So there's nothing I can say that's good about being a Muslim woman, because I constantly and frequently just wished I was a man. My dad actually asked me one time, "Are you jealous of your brother?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm jealous of my brother. He gets to go outside and he gets to play football and ride his bicycle. I have to sit at home all day." And he said, "Don't be jealous. Jealousy is bad." And he just walked off. It's like, that's not what do you mean?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but I think actually it's small steps that you took that made you realize there's something wrong here. I don't think there was one decisive moment. I think it was just one thing then that broke the camel's back. But to get back to my question, was there anything positive in Quran or in Hadith or something that you took that you said, it's good to be a woman because this is positive?
Not specifically in the Quran or the Hadith. I think there was one or two things that stuck out to me that I was like, oh, that means I'm a good thing. Um, but not significantly. So there's like one narration where Muhammad says, if you have four daughters or three daughters and you marry them off, you're guaranteed paradise. And I thought, oh, so it's a good thing to have daughters. But then back then with my child brain, I didn't realize that it's the man who's going to paradise. It doesn't necessarily guarantee the daughters going to paradise. Um, and then the other thing was like the mother thing, like mother deserves three times as much obedience as the father and things like that. Um, but if I'm being completely honest, there weren't things that stuck out to me in the Quran and the Hadith that made me feel good about being a Muslim woman. It was more things that like preachers and scholars said. Things like, oh, she's a precious diamond and that's why we need to protect her and things like that. I used to idolize these like warlike figures in Islamic history who were women. One is Nusayba bint Khalaf. One was, ironically, Aisha, who were both. Well, Aisha led a war, and Nusayba bint Khalaf was. She wasn't a warrior, but she was. There was like one battle that she took part in, and I really like took that, and I was like, yes, strong woman. But the rest of them, for the majority of the Sahabis who were women, were just doormats, and it's just disheartening, really, because there aren't that many figures in Islamic history at the time of the Prophet that are like strong women, unless you take Khadija, but she like died like 2 years into Islam.
How much were you involved with exactly historical figures with females in Islam? Were you ever confronted with examples like Khadija, for example, who was a woman in her own right, who was wealthy, who had her own company, who proposed to Muhammad and not the other way around? Did that never make you think about, hang on, what has changed?
Well, see, Khadija was always held as like a Muslim figure, though, even though all of that stuff didn't come out of Islam, it came from pre-Islamic Arabia. She did that before the advent of Islam. And the way that it's like sold to young girls, and when I was a young girl, was that, oh, look at this high-powered businesswoman who, gave no fucks and she proposed to Muhammad and all of this stuff. But it's like, yeah, but Islam didn't bring that. That's got nothing to do with Islam. That was before Islam. But I didn't realize that at the time. Another thing that a lot of preachers will say is that the first martyr of Islam was a woman. It's not exactly the best fucking example of a powerful woman, is it? Um,
Yeah.
Actually, we did a show several months ago, didn't we, Stops, where the first martyr of Islam was actually Muhammad, because Islam actually belongs to Khadija. She set it up. So hopefully we'll do another show on that one about how Khadija set Islam up.
Were you aware
yeah,
of that,
but
Faye? Did you actually know the role of Khadija, or was it all like whitewashed?
it was all whitewashed. Everything was whitewashed because I was just made to not think and think critically about it. Because I felt like if I questioned it, that was wrong, you know?
Okay,
And
but so
what?
you were given the story of Khadija, but you didn't say,
Yeah,
yeah, but hang on, why is it about Muhammad? Why isn't it about Khadija? Because Thunder is absolutely correct. I mean, she is the one who started it actually, because according to the Sunnah, because it's both in the biography and it's in the hadiths, she is the one who said to him, listen, let's go and check this out. And yes, you're a prophet. You need to go with this. You need to run with this. Let's go. Yeah, 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 yeah. If she had said anything different, according to the Islamic texts, this
I
would
think
never have
that
happened.
I think that if Khadija had lived just a little longer, I don't think Islam would be as fucked as it is now. Um, but no, it was never about the significance of Khadija. The significance of Khadija is so rarely highlighted in Islamic history in terms of the seerah. She's just the way that they talk about her is almost as if she was in the background
Yeah,
rather than like they
it's
just talk about how she comforted him when he was freaking the fuck out. Like that's all they talk about. They don't talk about the fact that she put it in his head that he's a prophet.
and she knew what was going on. She even knew the name. Remember, Allah, your Allah. Well, by Allah, he will never allow this to you. So she knew more about Allah than what Muhammad did. But I don't want to say too much because I'd like to do another show on that one. But I will just going back onto the Khadija thing. They don't want to touch on Khadija that much. It's almost like, yeah, Khadija, she was the first wife. Let's move on now. Nothing to see here. Because the moment you start delving in it, these are the conclusions that Muslims are going to draw when they look at all the authentic sources and all the information on Khadija. We have to bear in mind, Muslims are intelligent people too. They will draw these conclusions themselves if they get exposed to this information. So
But to answer your question about history, I used to idolize a lot of warrior characters in history. Um, Not necessarily Islamic history, because a lot of female warriors don't exist in Islamic history. But in other cultures, I used to idolize them. And I always thought to myself, like, why doesn't that exist in Islam? Being such a warring religion as it is, why doesn't that exist in Islam? And I kind of always like had that in the back of my mind because I romanticized that idea because there wasn't any other way of looking at it.
What, this Amazonian idea or what?
Yeah, so like I used to admire Boudica and how she led her people against the Romans, the Amazons, Valkyries. Like I was a history student, so I used to go over stuff like that, and I would just be like, well, these societies seem to treat their women way better than Islam. Um,
Okay.
but obviously I could never say that.
If you were to have, no, let's put, if you were to be like a Muslim, do you think that if you were to have kids, you would still bring them up the same way as you were brought up?
You know what? My biggest fear in the world is having children because I'm so
Okay, then let me ask
terrified.
you something different. If you think that you might have children and you are not a Muslim the way that you are now, let's say, what would you teach them about Islam? Just stay away?
I would say everybody believes in fucking fairy tales. You can believe what you want, whatever makes you feel comfortable against the inevitability of dying and not existing anymore. You can believe whatever you want to believe. Just don't shove it down my throat.
So, and you know, of course, what the follow-up question is going to be. What happens if your daughter becomes a Muslima?
That's fine. It's her life. As long as she's not going around the world gallivanting and killing people, it's fine.
And if
She
she
can do what she
does?
wants. If she does, I don't know. I'm just gonna have a selfish moment and just be like, what have I done?
Remember the first item I had in the news, okay? This was a woman who decided to blow up St. Paul's. I mean, for me, this is crazy. But this is the way that it works. So imagine if you're a mother and you've left Islam behind and you give birth to a daughter and she becomes a female Muslim, a radical one at that, a militant one at that, and she's then the one who threatens to blow up St. Paul's. I mean, how would that make you feel? My goodness, this
Stops.
must be
Okay,
terrible.
let me tell you why I'm so afraid of having children. It's exactly for that reason. It's the fear, and I don't necessarily think that it's even moral to have children until you are absolutely certain that you want one, and there is a need for you to have one. Um, but the reason that I am afraid of having a child is that I remember when I was in school and I first learned about Hitler, and he used to venerate his mother. He had a day on his mother's birthday. He used to give out medals to mothers, which I don't know why, but he used to do something like that. And in my brain, I got it in my brain. What if I gave birth to the next Hitler? Like I will forever be known as the mother of the new world Hitler. And I think
Or you
since
could be the
then,
mother of the new Albert Einstein.
yeah, but I don't care about that. Like that 1,000 people could give birth to Einsteins, but once I become the mother of Hitler, now it's a problem.
Interesting. Okay.
Sense
I
like
mean,
for
I
me,
can relate to that. Yes, I can understand that because the level of praise that you get for being the mother of a genius is a lot less than the wrath that you will receive if you are the mother of a despotic tyrant. I absolutely understand that. Yeah.
yeah, like I could not imagine the amount of shame that that woman had for giving birth to such an awful human being.
Faye, is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Um, Not really. I think we
Okay, good.
covered everything.